start to require American citizens.
I ask that the quorum call be lifted.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on December 8th, Donald Trump nominated Andrew Puzder to serve as Secretary of Labor. He was scheduled to come before the Help Committee tomorrow for his confirmation hearing. There is some reporting suggesting that he is having some second thoughts, and I sincerely hope that that is true. The reasons Mr. Puzder is a terrible choice for this job are literally too numerous for me to cover fully, but I'm at least going to give it a start here. If you work for a living, the labor secretary is very important to you. This person is responsible for protecting the interests of 150 million American workers. He will be the person responsible for enforcing the laws that ensure that employers actually pay workers for every hour they work, and setting the standards to prevent workplace injuries and even death. Unfortunately, Mr. Puzder is not the kind of person the American people can trust to stand up for workers. Since 2000, Mr. Puzder has served as the CEO of the billion-dollar company CKE Restaurant Holdings. Now, you may know it better as the parent company of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. These two fast food chains are known for paying very low wages to workers. Mr. Puzder has a long record of cheating workers out of overtime. He's paid out millions of dollars to settle claims when he was caught cheating. We're not talking about isolated incidents here. They reflect the kind of business that Mr. Puzder built. Mr. Puzder is a frequent political pundit and commentator who has vocally opposed higher minimum wages. He has also strongly opposed new overtime protections that would give 4 million workers an estimated $1.5 billion raise in a single year. Mr. Puzder also delights in expressing personal disdain for his workers. He bragged in his very first memo as CEO. He wrote that he wanted, quote, no more people behind the counter unless they have their teeth. Ha ha. He said he would like to replace his workers with robots because, quote, they are always polite, they always upsell, they never take a vacation, and there's never a slip and fall or an age, sex, or discrimination case. The Senate has an obligation to hear from those who are best qualified to tell America about Mr. Puzder's suitability to be labor secretary and to stand up for American workers, his own workers. And that's why many of us asked the chairman of the Help Committee to include Mr. Puzder's workers in his confirmation hearing. And when the chairman refused to do so, we just went ahead and convened our own forum to allow those workers a chance to speak. 17 senators attended. Those 17 senators heard from Laura McDonald, who worked as a general manager at Carl's Jr. in Tucson, Arizona for 20 years. For years, she was forced to work extra hours without pay. Employees like Laura are the subject of a major lawsuit against Mr. Puzder's company, CKE, regarding unpaid overtime. Those 17 senators heard from Lupe Guzman, who is a single mother who has devoted the last 7 years of her life to Carl's Jr. in Las Vegas, Nevada. She's worked the graveyard shift for rock-bottom wages. 7 years of loyalty. And Lupe is still paid so little that she's on food stamps to feed her kids. Lupe sat in front of the United States Senate and wept openly about her terrible treatment at the hands of Mr. Puzder's company. The senators also heard from Roberto Ramirez, who has worked in the fast food industry for over 20 years, mostly at Carl's Jr. in Los Angeles, California. He worked regularly off the clock at Carl's Jr., meaning they didn't pay him. Roberto even had a full paycheck stolen by his manager. You know, for every Laura, Lupe, and Roberto, we found dozens of workers who are afraid to speak out about the terrible conditions at CKE. We compiled some of the stories from folks brave enough to speak up into a 20-page report detailing firsthand accounts of the men and women who work for Mr. Puzder. Those stories are horrifying, and I will read some of them later this hour. Mr. Puzder's company has a truly atrocious record of treating his own workers terribly. Indeed, he has dripping disdain for people who work for a living. This alone disqualifies him to be Secretary of Labor. But there's more. In recent weeks, it has come out that Mr. Puzder employed an undocumented immigrant in his household for years, and he didn't pay taxes on that employment. Yep, you heard that correctly. The Trump administration, which bellows about building a wall and pounds its chest about ripping millions of families apart with a deportation force, threatens to send millions of DREAM Act kids with deportation, has no problem putting a guy in charge of the Labor Department who cheats on his taxes and employs undocumented workers. The hypocrisy of that is pretty stunning, even for the Trump administration. And then there's the controversy over alleged spousal abuse. Over 25 years ago, Mr. Puzder's first wife appeared on an episode of Oprah Winfrey in a show about spousal abuse. I have watched the episode in which she appeared, as I believe every senator should. I found it extraordinarily troubling. Alongside his company's poor record of treatment of female employees, his highly explicit and sexualized ads, and his snide comments about sex discrimination, there is ample evidence that Mr. Puzder is a terrible choice to head the agency charged with ensuring that women and men are treated fairly in the workplace. And I understand that no matter who President Trump picks to run the Labor Department, I'm probably going to have a lot of issues with that person. But this is different. Andrew Puzder should not be the Labor Secretary. And if you ask the senators in this body, Republicans and Democrats, if you ask them behind closed doors with the cameras turned off, you will have a hard time finding people who think this divisive nomination is good for the country. It's been suggested that Mr. Puzder is, quote, tired of the abuse, close quote, that he's received during this confirmation process. Well, I think the workers at his companies are pretty tired of the abuse they've received while being at the mercy of an employer that doesn't care about them at all and who goes out of his way to squeeze them out of every last dime. That is literally the opposite of what we need in a labor secretary. I was prepared to question him on these issues tomorrow, but I hope it is true that he will withdraw his nomination before then. I also rise today to express many concerns over the appointment of Congressman Mick Mulvaney as Director of the Office of Management and Budget, and to urge my colleagues to seriously consider these issues before voting to confirm him. One of the best ways to understand what a nation stands for is to look at its budget. It's all right there. The budget tells who counts, it tells who gets a chance, and it tells who gets cast aside. The OMB director prepares the president's budget. He safeguards the president's promises by turning them into real commitments backed by your tax dollars. Now, during the campaign, President Trump promised over and over again that he would protect Medicare and Medicaid. He didn't imply it. He didn't drop hints about it. No, he made the clearest, plainest possible promise. He said, quote, "I'm not going to cut Medicare or Medicaid." But since the election, he's done a complete 180. He put up a transition team website that just dripped with code words for cuts, saying he would modernize and maximize flexibility for these programs. Gone were the unambiguous promises to protect Medicare and Medicaid. Then he started nominating people who have made it their life's work to gut Medicare and Medicaid. His Secretary of Health and Human Services has proposed cutting more than $1 trillion from these programs. And now his nominee for OMB director is someone who wants to cut Medicare and Medicaid to the bone. Congressman Mulvaney has voted to increase the retirement age for Medicare. Hey, you paid into that program with decades of hard work? Too bad. Just keep waiting. He also wants to privatize Medicare, and he wants to slash and burn his way through Medicaid, a program that is a lifeline for millions of people, for parents of people in nursing homes, for people with disabilities, for premature babies. In his confirmation hearing, Congressman Mulvaney was asked whether he'd set aside his right-wing ideology to fulfill the president's campaign promises to protect Medicare and Medicaid. The congressman could not have been clearer in his response. Forget all of that. Nope, not interested. Mulvaney is still a true believer on Medicare and Medicaid cuts, and whenever he has the president's ear, he will continue to advance his own radical ideas for burning down these indispensable programs. President Trump also promised that he would not cut Social Security. He guaranteed it. Here was his quote, many times, "We're gonna save your Social Security without making any cuts," he said. And here was his closer on that. "Mark my words." Okay, nice words. But he could have picked someone, anyone, to run his budgets, and instead he picked Congressman Mulvaney, one of Congress's most partisan crusaders against the Social Security program. He wants to raise the retirement age to 70. Heck, this is a person who called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. And boy, he's not messing around either. During his confirmation hearings, Congressman Mulvaney doubled down on his promise to rob American workers and retirees by gutting Social Security. When pressed by Republican Senator Lindsey Graham about whether he would urge President Trump to reconsider his promise not to cut Social Security, hey, Mulvaney said he absolutely would. Is this just a mistake? Did President Trump just pick Congressman Mulvaney by accident? The congressman certainly doesn't seem to think so. At his hearing, he said, quote, "I have to imagine that the president knew what he was getting when he asked me to fill that role." Yeah, Mulvaney himself believes he is being brought in to push for cuts in Medicare and Medicaid. Trump reverses his promise. A second person determined to cut Medicare and Medicaid makes it into a key government role. And who will pay the price? America's seniors. That's who. Apparently, Congressman Mulvaney isn't satisfied with cutting benefits for Americans who have worked and paid into the program for their entire lives. When it comes to abandoning American workers and families, for him, that's just the beginning. He has also called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, quote, "sick, sad, and a joke." Maybe he should spend a little more time talking to his constituents and a little less time talking to bank lobbyists. The CFPB has helped thousands of people in every state, including dozens of people in Congressman Mulvaney's own district, helped them recover unauthorized fees on their credit cards and checking accounts. It has helped them to correct errors on their credit reports. These are students, seniors, service members, and veterans who may have spent months haggling with their bank or student loan servicer over a wrong charge, only to get quick and complete relief after they went to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. In total, the agency, it's only been up for about 5.5 years now, it has forced the largest banks across this country and many of those who have been out there cheating consumers to return nearly $12 billion directly to the people they cheated. That's $12 billion that was stolen by big banks, by payday lenders, by debt collectors, that is now back in the pockets of the people who rightfully earned it. The only sick, sad joke is that Congressman Mulvaney thinks we should turn the big banks loose to prey on American families once again. Under Congressman Mulvaney's budget, Americans who have been cheated and scammed by huge financial institutions, they just be cast aside. Families who work hard for every dollar, only to have some ruthless corporation steal their savings right out from underneath them, will be cast aside. And the millions of Americans who have worked for decades planning to collect Social Security or Medicare when they retired will be told just to wait for more years. They'll be thrown straight to the curb. None of that is what America stands for. And that's just the stuff that directly contradicts the president's campaign promises. The stuff that's totally in line with the president's campaign promises is genuinely scary too. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump stated that he, quote, may cut the Department of Education. Will Congressman Mulvaney stand up for students? Unlikely. Congressman Mulvaney's record shows that he's fine building a federal budget that crushes students that are trying to get a college education. Students already pay too much for student loans, and Congressman Mulvaney's solution is to force students to pay more. He supports forcing more college students to borrow more money from private banks that charge sky-high interest rates without any of the basic protections that federal student loans have. He clearly wants to let private banks and Wall Street squeeze as much cash out of hardworking students as humanly possible to build their profits. In fact, Congressman Mulvaney wants to help these giant banks out even more by taking a sledgehammer to the federal student loan program and making federal loan terms lousy for students. That's why he repeatedly voted to eliminate subsidized student loans for low-income students, and why he helped block legislation to allow borrowers to lower their monthly payments by refinancing their student loans to lower interest rates. Not only has he voted to increase the interest rates that the government charges students, he's also voted to cut Pell Grants to poor college students. If Congressman Mulvaney had his way, millions more hardworking students would be shoved even deeper into debt at the start of their working lives just because they couldn't afford the high cost of college. Under his budget, students will just be cast aside. In his confirmation hearing, Congressman Mulvaney also said that he is, quote, in lockstep with Donald Trump's plans to grow military spending. But he said he'd pay for that increase in funding with deep cuts to domestic programs that working men and women around the country depend on. Programs that could easily include Head Start, which provides opportunities for low-income children, the disaster aid that supports families in crisis after a hurricane or a tornado, or resiliency programs to protect America as worldwide climate changes. Listen to that again. The children who attend Head Start can stay home so that Donald Trump can divert more money to military spending. The people who get buried in a 100-year snowstorm can stay buried so that Donald Trump can divert more money to military spending. The people who live near coasts and rivers and streams can be washed away by rising oceans and other waterways so Donald Trump can divert money to military spending. And this nominee, Congressman Mulvaney, is in lockstep to make it happen. And under President Trump's new one in, two out executive order, it's Mr. Mulvaney who would have discretion to give each agency a regulatory budget and to approve any proposed regulations that increase that budget. The order is supposedly designed to, quote, make life easier and to make government work better. But Congressman Mulvaney isn't interested in making government work better, and he's certainly not interested in making life easier. In fact, he spent his entire political career working to cripple the agencies that protect American families, American workers, American consumers, and American small businesses. Nowhere is this clearer than in his attacks on the federal agencies that protect consumers, that preserve our environment, and that help keep our country safe. He has worked to starve agencies of the resources they need to do their jobs, voting to cut funding to law enforcement, voting to gut the Social Security program, and voting to completely defund the organization that provides critical legal services to low-income American children, families, seniors, and veterans. But it's not enough for him to starve agencies to the breaking point. Nope. He has also supported radical bills to stop agencies from issuing regulations that keep our air clean, our food safe, and our economy from suffering another devastating financial crisis. Congressman Mulvaney wants to require agencies to adopt the bill that imposes the least costs on big businesses, even when those costs are about making sure that companies don't cut corners by cheating, poisoning, and killing people. Look, if it is cheaper for a corporation to kill you than it is for the corporation to redesign the product or clean up their mess, Congressman Mulvaney stands with the corporation. I'm sure he'd be willing to say something nice at your funeral about how your contribution helped give the corporation record profits. And if all that wasn't bad enough, Congressman Mulvaney is ready to rock and roll on secret money in politics. Washington is already awash in dark money, but that is not enough for Congressman Mulvaney. He has worked to open the doors even wider to secret spending in politics. Over and over, he has voted to shield the identity of political donors, keep them secret. For example, he opposed a rule that required corporations applying for government contracts to disclose their political contributions. Again, excuse me, just think about that one for a minute. He doesn't want corporations that bid for government contracts to be forced to tell when they give money to help targeted government officials. We already have a problem with money in politics. Mulvaney just wants to make it worse. Congressman Mulvaney's record shows one thing. He will make sure that our federal government works well for giant corporations and billionaires who don't like to play by the rules. And he will cast aside the rest of the public to do that. That is definitely not what our nation stands for. I understand that Democrats and Republicans have different priorities when it comes to the federal budget. Yeah, I get that. But when one person wants to slash Social Security for American retirees, to cut Medicare for senior citizens, to gut health benefits for low-income families, to drive up the cost of paying for college, and to gut programs that help families and in crisis and low-income children, all in the name of making life even easier for giant corporations and billionaires, well, I think it's clear that his priorities do not include the safety and security of millions of Americans. And that's a priority that should be at the top of all of our lists here in the Senate, Republican and Democrat. I will stand with the Americans that Congressman Mulvaney will cast aside as budget director, and I will vote no on his nomination. Mick Mulvaney wants to slash benefits under Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and countless other programs. These are just numbers to him. But behind those numbers are real people. Real lives are at risk with every decision he will make as the budget director. So what I want to do is take the time I have remaining and share the stories of just a few of the people who would be affected. Lee from Plymouth wrote to me, worried that Congressman Mulvaney would cut Social Security for her and for others in Massachusetts. Lee had an interesting suggestion, and here's what she wrote. I have just sent off an email message to Representative Mulvaney regarding his spearheading of the cutting of Social Security benefits. I challenged him and many of his colleagues to do this. Live on an income like mine of $1,219.80 for 1 month. Having received my first increase of $2.50 in several years, it was offset by a Medicare cost increase of $11.50. Do the math. I hope you and the other Democratic members of both houses fight like hell to raise our benefits. We are definitely in for a bumpy ride over the next 4 years. As the saying goes, it ain't gonna be pretty. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Leah. Thank you for writing. I also heard from Yannicka from Williamstown, who is worried about several nominees working to cut Social Security. And here's what Yannicka had to say. It is terrifying to consider either of these nominees, Price or Mulvaney, being confirmed for the positions to which they have been nominated. They will work to undo, not to strengthen, Social Security. This is a profoundly disturbing possibility. I urge you to do everything you can to oppose their confirmation. Thank you, Yannicka. I will keep fighting for your hard-earned benefits. Janet from Florence also reached out to me. She shared the inspiring stories of her and her husband, and then she told me how worried she is that cuts to Social Security and Medicare could be coming under Congressman Mulvaney's watch. And here's what she wrote. I am 60 years old and have always been employed in higher education where I work hard and long for modest wages, frequently the case in women-dominated professions. My husband is a child care worker who works with infants and toddlers. The work we do is meaningful and it makes a societal contribution. At 60 and 64, we have always lived like graduate students. We shop at the Goodwill, cook from scratch, bring our lunch, and drive old cars. and bike and walk. We will each be working until age 70 or longer if our health permits. This is fine. We are fortunate to live as we do. But with market-based retirement funds and with family members needing our support, we need Social Security, which is not broken, to remain and to be strengthened. And we need access to health care for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren. This is a plea from the fading middle class to oppose the Price and Mulvaney nominations. We, and people far less fortunate than we are, need your stout support. Thank you, Janet. Thank you and your husband for all you do for your community. And I promise I will do my best to protect your benefits. I've received hundreds of these types of letters. Letters from constituents who are scared that cuts to Medicaid and Medicare could endanger their basic ability to survive. Letters from constituents who have seen how important these services are to thousands across the state and millions across the country. Constituents who aren't sure where to turn and who to blame. They just know they cannot afford to lose these benefits. Like a woman from Somerville who wrote to me about the work she does as an intensive care coordinator. Here's what she had to say. I am an intensive care coordinator through Riverside Community Care, a statewide human service agency that delivers crucial mental health services to at-risk youth. In my program, the Guidance Center Community Service Agency, we specifically provide child behavioral health initiatives, CBHI, services to youth in Cambridge, Somerville, Medford, Malden, Waltham, Woburn, Wilmington, and other northern towns. I am extremely nervous that the new presidential administration will attack Medicaid and put our programs in jeopardy. If you're not familiar with the CBHI wraparound model, I can briefly explain why these services are so important. One, we serve youth in poverty. Two, our services are community-based, so we go to the homes of the families we're serving, so they don't need to rely on transportation. Three, we are a form of outpatient care that prevents youth who are suicidal or homicidal from needing hospitalization, or if they are hospitalized, helping the family develop a plan for when they're discharged. Four, although the child with mental health diagnosis is our identified client, the services benefit the whole family. We understand that taking care of children with special needs is taxing, so we identify resources and services for the parents as well. Five, we work with state departments like the Department of Children and Families, Department of Mental Health, and Department of Developmental Disabilities. Six, our model works. I myself rarely close a case without having had at least one goal identified by the family met, and there are growing statistics about the benefits of having us in place. I hope you can bring this argument where it needs to go to ensure that we have a future here in Massachusetts. So I just want to say on this one, thank you. Thank you for writing, and thank you for the work that you do. I am doing my best to bring this story. This is a story everybody in the United States Senate should listen to. It is a story about how we reach out to those who most need us, and provide the kind of care they need. So thank you. Thank you for your work, and thank you for writing. I also received a letter from an occupational therapist from Massachusetts. It told me all about the important work that she's been doing and how Medicaid has been crucial to that work. And here's what she had to say. As a constituent and occupational therapy practitioner, I am writing to you to express my concerns about a major restructuring of the Medicaid program. Medicaid is an essential safety net program for the most vulnerable in our society. In 2015, 39% of children received health insurance either through the Children's Health Insurance Program or through Medicaid. More than 60% of nursing home residents are supported primarily through Medicaid. Additionally, Medicaid provides health care services and long-term services and supports to more than 10 million people living with disabilities. And one in five Medicaid recipients receive behavioral health services. Restructuring of the Medicaid program through per capita caps or block granting and significant cuts to Medicaid programs would jeopardize the long-term health and independence of current Medicaid beneficiaries. Thus, I urge extreme care and caution when considering a major restructuring of the program or other significant changes, waiver of mandatory services or dramatic cuts. Thank you for all of the work that you do, and thank you for writing and making this important point about who uses Medicaid and how critical it is to the basic support services that we provide. Another constituent wrote to me about the amazing work that she does in the Boston area for those with severe mental illness and how Medicaid and Medicare help these people. And here is what she had to say. I work with people with severe mental illness in the greater Boston area. A majority of my patients receive their therapy and medication through Medicaid and Medicare. Even the thought of losing coverage heightens their anxiety. If coverage is reduced or copays raised, they stand to lose not only therapy and group interventions, but also the medication, which is essential to avoiding higher levels of care. Given the high rate of co-occurring physical and mental health issues, the general health of my patients will be severely compromised with any reduction in access to care. Nearly 1 out of 3 people covered by Medicaid expansion live with a mental health or substance use condition, and people with marketplace insurance plans have fair and equal mental health coverage. With this coverage, people have access to mental health services that support recovery. As a constituent, I would like you to keep in mind that Medicaid or insurance marketplace plans are helping all of those who struggle with mental illness and who, with accessible supports, can lead healthier lives. Again, thank you for the work you do, and thank you for writing. It's a powerfully important point. Congressman Mulvaney wants to slash these programs, and that's why I will be voting against his nomination. I also received more personal stories from people like Michael from Acton, who told me about his son, and here's what he wrote. My particular concern is the attack on the ACA and Medicaid and Medicare. My biggest worry is that my 27-year-old son, Adam, who was born with microcephaly, he is a very loving person with a great smile, but he functions roughly at the level of a 12-month-old. He currently lives in a group residence and goes to a day habilitation program during the week. Both of these programs are funded in part by Medicaid. If Medicaid funds are cut, I worry that the day hab program will not be able to continue, or at the very least, will operate at a much reduced level. This would seriously degrade the quality of Adam's life. I worry what will happen at his already understaffed residence. As it is, the staff at Adam's residence and day habilitation programs are paid very low wages to do very tough jobs. Because of this, there is already a constant problem of finding enough people to staff these jobs if they are paid less or have to do even more work because of lower staffing levels. The prospect of what is coming scares me. What will my son's life be like? Thank you for writing, Michael. I appreciate it. And I will be out there fighting for Adam. And I hope we can get a lot of people in the United States Senate to do that as well. Thank you. We also heard from Daniel Mumbauer, who is president of the High Point Treatment Center in Massachusetts. Daniel has experienced firsthand how Medicaid funds can change the lives of thousands of people in Massachusetts alone. And this is what Daniel wrote. On behalf of High Point Treatment Center, I am writing to urge and request your support in protecting the Affordable Care Act and preserving Medicaid expansion in the 115th Congress. High Point served over 30,000 individuals last year. We provide substance use disorder and mental health services to adolescents and adults. Recent health insurance data show that Americans with mental health and substance use disorders are the single largest beneficiaries of the Affordable Care Act's Medicaid expansion. Nearly 1 in 3 who receives health insurance coverage through Medicaid expansion either has a mental illness, substance abuse disorder, or both. By repealing the Medicaid expansion, this population of vulnerable Americans would be left without access to life-saving treatment, driving up costs in emergency department visits and hospital stays. I am also writing to urge your support for the protection of the Medicaid program from proposals to restructure Medicaid as a block grant or capped program. These proposals would reduce federal investment in Medicaid and leave millions of Americans without access to needed mental health and addictions treatment in our communities. Please work with your colleagues to protect our nation's most vulnerable patient population and preserve their access to treatment. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you very much for writing, and thank you for the work you do. Congressman Mulvaney wants to eviscerate health programs that would help Michael's son and the thousands that are treated at the High Point Treatment Center. That is exactly the opposite of what we should be doing. I have also heard from many constituents worried about losing their Social Security benefits under the new administration. Like Kensington from Hatfield, who is terrified that his mother, who depends on Social Security, will lose her benefits. And here's what he wrote. Last night scared me for the first time. My mother, who is 69 and depends on Social Security for her income and has severe COPD and relies on Medicare and Medicaid for prescriptions and medical supplies to help her breathe. She was crying and is afraid of losing everything and that she will die. I know it is extreme thinking, but without her medicine and income, it is unfortunately the truth. I didn't know what to say to comfort her, and that scared me. What can I say to ease her mind and let her know that she will be okay? Will she be okay? Thank you, Kensington, for your note. Your mother is right to be worried, and that's why I am fighting this nomination. I have so many more stories, many stories that I could read, but I'm running out of time here. I just want to say, Mick Mulvaney is dangerous to the American people, and he is dangerous to the federal government. He will slash programs right and left without worrying about the living, breathing people that he's hurting in the process. That's why I will be voting against his nomination as director of the Office of Management and Budget, and why I urge my colleagues to do the same. Let's make sure that Mick Mulvaney never ends up as the head of the Office of Management and Budget, never is in a position to put together a budget to cut Medicare, cut Medicaid. Let's make sure that we keep our government, our Medicare, our Medicaid, our Affordable Care Act, working for the American people. That's what I'll keep fighting for. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield.